No one understood the diplomat's warning until the quiet waitress translated every word softly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. The dinner rush was in full swing at La Belle Poche, one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. The chandeliers cast their warm light across the tables, and the soft clinking of wine glasses mixed with the gentle hum of conversation. At table 5, a figure sat alone, a man dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, his eyes flicking nervously toward the clock. It was the diplomat, Elias Laurent, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. His reputation had reached every corner of the city, and his presence in the restaurant stirred a sense of quiet anticipation. No one could have predicted, however, that the moment would not be marked by anything grand, but by a whisper from someone most would not have given a second glance. Sarah, the young waitress who moved among the tables with quiet efficiency, stood by table 5, waiting for the diplomat to place his order. She was the kind of person who was easily overlooked. Shy, reserved, with a smile that seemed to appear only when absolutely necessary. Tonight, however, something was different. She wasn't merely delivering drinks or clearing plates. She was about to witness a conversation that no one else could understand. Laurent, deep in conversation with two men, spoke in fluent French, his voice low and urgent. The men across from him nodded, but their understanding seemed incomplete, as though the words were lost in translation. Sarah hovered nearby, her attention caught by the seriousness of the conversation. At first, she thought nothing of it. But then, she caught a few words that made her stop in her tracks. The diplomat was discussing a sensitive matter, the kind of issue that could change the course of political events. She knew it wasn't her place to intervene, but her instinct told her something was wrong. The men across from Laurent didn't seem to fully grasp the implications of what was being said. She waited. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She knew she had to act, but how? No one would expect a simple waitress to have the answer. And yet, Sarah felt the weight of the moment. She could hear the diplomat's words clearly, and without thinking, she leaned in, just enough for him to hear. I believe you just said that this could lead to an international conflict if the details are leaked, she said softly, translating the diplomat's warning word for word. The two men at the table froze. They looked at her, disbelief spreading across their faces. Sarah, who had been invisible to them moments before, was now the center of attention. Laurent himself turned slowly, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. For a brief moment, his face betrayed no emotion, but there was something in his gaze that suggested he knew exactly what had just happened. He did not dismiss her, as others might have. Instead, he nodded slightly, as if to acknowledge her understanding. The tension in the room shifted. Sarah had no idea what she had just stepped into. She had only intended to do what she had always done, to help. But now, she was caught in the midst of a diplomatic crisis that no one had expected her to be part of. Laurent's eyes never left her as the silence grew thicker. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. His next words would be crucial, but Sarah wasn't sure if she had just made a mistake by speaking up. The men at the table exchanged glances, clearly unsettled. Sarah could sense that they were unsure of how to proceed. The moment seemed to hang in the air, a fragile thread waiting to snap. The quiet waitress, who had been invisible just moments before, had now unknowingly stepped into the spotlight. And as the diplomat sat there, still watching her, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation settle around her. What had she just revealed? Was it too late to take it back? The air in La Belle Poche was thick with tension after Sarah's unexpected translation. The hum of conversation around the room seemed to fade into the background, as all eyes were now on her. Her hands, which had been so steady moments before, were now trembling slightly as she placed the drink orders on the table in front of the diplomat. It wasn't the usual rush of serving patrons. No, this felt different. This felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't see yet, but something huge. The diplomat, Elias Laurent, remained uncharacteristically silent. His usual icy demeanor had shifted, and his sharp eyes never left Sarah as he mulled over what had just happened. The two men across from him exchanged uneasy glances, their previous confidence evaporating into thin air. Sarah's heart beat loudly in her chest, but she kept her calm, professional demeanor. She couldn't allow herself to show how shaken she was. She had just translated a warning that no one else in the room seemed to understand. A warning that could change everything. The air in the room felt suffocating. Sarah made her way back to the service station, her mind racing. She had only been trying to help, to do her job, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was unfolding. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was far beyond the usual dinner shift. Elias Laurent wasn't just a diplomat. He was a man whose every word carried weight, and now, Sarah had inadvertently become part of something she had never expected to be involved in. As she returned to her station, she tried to shake off the unease that had crept into her mind. Her colleagues were busy with their own duties, oblivious to the unfolding drama. She glanced back at table 5, where Laurent and his guests were still seated, but now, a new tension hung in the air. The men were speaking in hushed tones, but Sarah could tell they were no longer discussing trivial matters. This wasn't just about business or diplomacy anymore. It was personal, and she had a feeling that her actions had somehow set this whole thing in motion. For the rest of the evening, Sarah couldn't focus on anything else. As she moved between tables, the words from the diplomat's conversation replayed in her mind. What exactly had she translated? What had she uncovered? She couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of guilt, as though she had stepped too far into a world that wasn't hers. Yet, there was another part of her, a quieter part, that was beginning to wonder if she had done something important. Maybe even something brave. After her shift ended, Sarah walked out into the crisp New York evening, her mind still spinning. The streets were alive with the usual hum of the city, but Sarah felt like she was moving through a different world, one where she didn't quite belong. She was still in her waitress uniform, the weight of the night's events bearing down on her. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow crossed an invisible line. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her manager, Pierre. Elias Laurent wants to speak with you before you leave, it read. Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected the diplomat to forget about her, to dismiss her as just another invisible member of the service staff. But that wasn't happening. Instead, he wanted to speak with her. Sarah's mind raced as she made her way back to the restaurant, her steps quickening as she approached the entrance. She felt like she was about to face something she wasn't prepared for, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. When she entered, the familiar warmth of the restaurant hit her, but it felt different now. The sounds, the smells, even the way the light bounced off the polished floors, all felt like they were in sharp contrast to the weight of the situation she was about to face. Laurent was waiting for her at the bar, his sharp features now softened, almost expectant. He looked up as she approached, his gaze steady. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I need you to understand something. What you translated tonight wasn't just a simple conversation. You've helped me more than you realize." His words caught her off guard. She had expected some kind of reprimand, or at the very least, a request to forget everything that had transpired. But that wasn't what she got. Instead, he was thanking her. For the first time that evening, she felt a sense of relief. Laurent's eyes held hers, and she could see a flicker of something behind his usual cold demeanor. "I'm not sure if you know this, but that warning you translated? It was crucial. It's something I've been trying to communicate to my team for weeks, but none of them truly understood the implications. Not like you did." Sarah was silent, unsure of what to say. She had never expected this kind of conversation. "I need someone who can see things clearly, who isn't caught up in the usual games of power and influence," Laurent continued, his voice low. "I think you might be that person." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Sarah was speechless. She had always thought of herself as just a waitress, someone who would remain invisible to the people around her. But here was a man who was willing to acknowledge her, to recognize something in her that she hadn't even recognized in herself. Laurent's gaze softened as he stood up, his tall frame towering over her. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight," he said, "but I'd like you to think about what I'm offering." His words felt heavy, but they also felt like an invitation to something bigger, something that could change the course of her life. As Sarah walked out of the restaurant that night, her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. What had she just been offered? What did it mean for her future? She had no answers, only more questions. But one thing was clear: her life was never going to be the same again. The following days after Sarah's conversation with Elias Laurent were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. She had returned to her usual routine at La Belle Poche, but everything felt different. The familiar clink of glasses, the sound of silverware on plates, and the hum of conversations around her seemed to fade into the background, as her thoughts kept drifting back to what had happened. Laurent's words echoed in her mind. "I need someone who can see things clearly, who isn't caught up in the usual games of power and influence." She wasn't sure if she was the person he was looking for, but something about that moment made her believe that she was more than just a waitress. Her phone buzzed one morning as she sat in the small apartment she called home. It was a text from Pierre, the restaurant manager. "Elias Laurent wants to meet with you. Can you come to his office today?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It had only been a few days since their last interaction, and already he was asking to meet again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever came next, but she knew she couldn't avoid it. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "Yes, I'll be there at noon." As the clock ticked closer to noon, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of nervous excitement in her stomach. She was used to being invisible in the world of high society that surrounded La Belle Poche, but today, that invisibility was slipping away. She slipped into the dress she had worn to the restaurant's special events, something that made her feel just a little more confident. The subway ride to the downtown office building felt longer than it should have. She arrived at the sleek, modern building where Laurent's office was located, her heart pounding with every step. When she entered the lobby, a receptionist gave her a polite smile, but didn't seem to recognize her. "I'm here to see Elias Laurent," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course, Miss Matthews," the receptionist replied, after a brief moment of confusion. "He's expecting you. Please follow me." The elevator ride up to the top floor was almost too quiet, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder what kind of world she was stepping into. Laurent's office was on the 33rd floor, offering a panoramic view of the city. The moment Sarah stepped off the elevator, she could feel the change in atmosphere. The space was pristine and immaculate, filled with modern furniture and large windows that looked out over Manhattan. She felt out of place here, but she knew she had no choice but to walk through the door. Laurent was sitting behind a large, polished desk, his posture as impeccable as ever. He stood when she entered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm glad you came." He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, and Sarah sat down, feeling a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. Laurent took his time before speaking again, as though he were choosing his words carefully. "I'm not here to waste your time," he began. "I need someone who can see things from a different perspective. Someone who is not tied to the power games and politics that usually surround this world. You have a clarity I haven't seen in a long time." His words struck Sarah more deeply than she expected. She had always seen herself as ordinary, just someone trying to get by. But here was a man who saw something in her that she didn't even see in herself. Laurent leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm offering you an opportunity, Sarah. A chance to step into a world that you've only seen from the outside. I need someone like you to help with a delicate matter. Your ability to translate not just language, but intent, is something rare, and I think you can be of great help to me." Sarah felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: disbelief, fear, and excitement. She had never imagined she would be sitting in an office like this, speaking to someone like Laurent. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm just a waitress. I have no experience with anything like this." Laurent smiled, a small, knowing smile. "That's exactly why I'm asking you," he replied. "You don't come with the usual baggage or expectations. You see things clearly, without the filters of ambition and power. I need that, and I'm willing to compensate you handsomely for your time and expertise." Sarah felt the weight of his words. She had been living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. The offer was tempting, more tempting than anything she had ever been offered before. But there was a part of her that hesitated. This was a world she didn't know. A world of power, influence, and high-stakes decisions. "What exactly would I be doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Laurent paused for a moment before answering, his gaze unwavering. You'll be helping me navigate some very delicate negotiations. There are people who want to control the narrative of global events, and I need someone who can act as a neutral translator. Not just of words, but of intentions. People in this world don't always say what they mean. You'll help me uncover what's hidden beneath the surface. The weight of the decision was heavy, and Sarah's mind raced. She had always been good at reading people, at sensing the hidden layers in their words and actions. But this was different. This wasn't just about helping a customer or translating a few sentences. This was about playing a part in something much larger, something with real consequences. Laurent's eyes softened as he watched her struggle. I understand this is a big decision, he said quietly. But think about it. This is a chance to change your life, Sarah. To stop being a bystander in a world that has always seemed out of reach. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She was on the verge of something she couldn't fully comprehend, but the promise of a different life was so close. All she had to do was take the leap. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was ready to stay invisible any longer. The days that followed Sarah's conversation with Elias Laurent were filled with a quiet uncertainty. She had agreed to meet with him again, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a casual conversation. It wasn't even about a promotion or a simple job change. What Laurent had offered her was a glimpse into a world that she had only ever observed from the outside, and now, she was being invited into it. Sarah walked the familiar streets of Manhattan, her thoughts running through the possibilities that lay ahead. She couldn't stop thinking about the weight of his words, about how he had seen something in her that no one else had. You see things clearly, he had said, without the filters of ambition and power. Was that really true? Was she the person he needed? The next day, she found herself back in Laurent's office, sitting across from him, her heart still pounding in her chest. The office had the same immaculate atmosphere, sleek, polished, and cold. The view of the city below seemed distant, almost like another world. Laurent was calm, collected, as always. He offered her a seat, and Sarah took it, nervously adjusting her jacket as she sat down. Laurent didn't waste time. I know you've had time to think about what I offered, he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying seriousness. And I believe you've made your decision. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. She had been over it 1,000 times in her head, yet now that the moment was here, she still wasn't sure. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Laurent smiled, not in a mocking way, but in a way that suggested he understood her hesitation. You don't have to be sure right away, he said. But let me tell you this. The world you're about to enter is not about being the right person. It's about being the right fit for the job. And you've already shown me that you're capable of more than you realize. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. You translated the diplomat's warning, Sarah. You didn't just speak the words. You understood them. That's why I need you. Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze, and she knew that there was no turning back. If she walked away now, she might never have another chance like this. But what if she wasn't ready? What if she was stepping into a world she couldn't handle? What if she wasn't the person Laurent thought she was? What exactly would I be doing? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Laurent leaned forward, his expression shifting slightly as he began to explain. You'll be working directly with me, Sarah. We have a project that requires someone with your unique skill set. You'll be acting as a translator, but not just for words. You'll be interpreting motives, intentions, and hidden messages that no one else can see. He paused, letting her absorb his words. There are many things happening behind the scenes, and we need someone who can bridge the gap between the public and the private. Someone who can translate what's left unsaid. Someone who can detect the subtle nuances that others overlook. Sarah felt a chill run through her. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission. A dangerous one, perhaps. But the idea of being part of something bigger than herself, something that could shape the future, was overwhelming. I need someone I can trust, Laurent continued, his voice steady. Someone who won't get caught up in the politics or the power games. Someone who will see through the noise and focus on what really matters. Sarah swallowed hard. This was it. She was being asked to join a world she didn't fully understand, but one that could offer her more than she had ever dreamed of. I'll do it, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Laurent's eyes lit up with approval. Good, he said. You've made the right choice. He stood up and extended his hand toward her, and Sarah shook it, feeling the gravity of the decision settle in her chest. You'll start tomorrow, Laurent said, as he handed her a small envelope. Inside, you'll find the details of our first assignment. Sarah took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. As she left the office, the city felt different, like she was seeing it for the first time. The streets, the people, the noise, it was all part of a world she was now a part of. A world that was far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more exciting than she had ever imagined. She walked out of the building, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand, and for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. But there was still a part of her that was unsure. What had she just agreed to? What kind of danger was she about to face? The only thing she knew was that there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and the world she had once observed from the outside was now her reality. The next day, Sarah arrived at Laurent's office, her heart beating faster with each step she took through the sleek, high-rise building. The city below looked like a different world now, one that she was about to step into, whether she was ready or not. She had spent the night going over the envelope Laurent had given her, the one that contained the details of her first assignment. The cryptic words inside made her feel both anxious and excited. Asterisk. Your first task will require you to attend a confidential meeting. You will be expected to observe, interpret, and translate the subtle cues from key players. No direct involvement, just insight. Asterisk. It was vague, but there was no turning back now. Laurent was waiting for her when she stepped off the elevator. His expression was unreadable as always, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made Sarah feel like she was already part of something much bigger. He stood and gestured for her to take a seat across from him. Sarah, I trust you're ready for your first assignment, he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of expectation. Sarah nodded, trying to hide the nervousness she felt. She had no idea what to expect, but the gravity of the situation was clear. Laurent handed her a folder, its contents sealed tightly. Inside, you'll find everything you need to know about today's meeting. Be alert, be discreet, and above all, trust your instincts. Sarah opened the folder slowly. Inside, there was a brief outline of the meeting, but no names or details beyond that. There were vague references to a group of influential individuals, all of whom were apparently involved in a negotiation that could impact global business and politics. The document emphasized that Sarah's role would be to observe the conversation, paying close attention to body language, tone, and unspoken exchanges. Laurent had made it clear, this wasn't just about translation. This was about understanding what was being left unsaid. She felt a surge of anxiety rise in her chest. She was no longer just a waitress, caught in the midst of someone else's game. Now, she was a player. The meeting was to take place at an exclusive conference room in a luxury hotel downtown. Laurent was already there when Sarah arrived, his presence commanding the room, though he had yet to speak to the group. As she took her seat at the back of the room, she scanned the individuals present. They were all in suits, polished and perfect in their professional demeanor. But there was something about the way they carried themselves that made Sarah feel like they were all playing some intricate game, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Laurent nodded to her, signaling that the meeting was about to begin. As the conversation unfolded, Sarah's attention sharpened. She had trained herself over the years to observe people closely, to notice the little things that others might overlook. The way someone shifted in their seat, the slight twitch in their eyes, the hesitation in their voice. These were the things that told a story beyond the words being spoken. The discussion started off with formalities, but it wasn't long before things took a turn. One of the men at the table, a well-known corporate magnate, made a veiled threat to a rival, but it was hidden in the guise of a compliment. You're doing great work, he said, but there's always room for improvement. The way his lips curled into a smile didn't match the venom in his words. Sarah caught the underlying message instantly. The threat wasn't just a suggestion. It was a warning. As the discussion continued, she noticed another subtle exchange between a woman sitting at the far end of the table and a man seated next to her. The woman's hand lingered over the man's as she passed him a document. He glanced at it quickly, then tucked it away, but not before Sarah saw the quick flicker of fear in his eyes. Something wasn't right. She knew it, even though no one else seemed to notice. Lawrence's eyes met hers briefly, a slight nod indicating that she had observed correctly. He had been watching her closely, waiting to see if she would pick up on the unspoken cues that were so easily missed by others. As the meeting drew to a close, Laurent stood and addressed the group. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I trust we are all on the same page." Sarah's heart raced. She had just been part of something bigger than she could have imagined, but Laurent wasn't done yet. "Sarah," he called, motioning for her to approach. As she walked toward him, her mind buzzed with everything she had just witnessed. Had she done the right thing? Had she caught everything she was supposed to? Lawrence's gaze was steady as she approached, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of doubt. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "You noticed things no one else did. That's what I need from you." Sarah nodded, a mix of relief and uncertainty flooding her. "But what happens next?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Laurent smiled, a glimmer of something unspoken in his eyes. "Next, we move forward. There's more to be done, Sarah, and I believe you're the one who can help me get it done." She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but one thing was certain. Her life had just changed forever. She had stepped into a world of power, intrigue, and danger, and there was no going back. As she left the meeting, the weight of her decision settled over her. She had chosen this path, but where would it lead? What had she just become a part of? Only time would tell. The next few weeks were a blur for Sarah as she settled into her new role under Elias Laurent. The world she had stepped into was not as glamorous as she had imagined, nor was it as straightforward. It was a world of subtle power plays, veiled threats, and delicate negotiations that took place behind closed doors. Sarah's job was simple on the surface, to observe and translate, but it was the unspoken messages, the ones hidden behind words and gestures, that she had to decode. Laurent had been right. Her ability to pick up on the smallest details made her invaluable. It wasn't just about translating languages. It was about understanding the hidden language of power. She had been assigned to attend several meetings, each one more intense than the last. The stakes were always high, the people involved were always influential, and Sarah was always the quiet observer. She felt like a fly on the wall, watching the world of the powerful unfold before her eyes. But every now and then, someone would look at her in a way that made her wonder if they could see through her calm facade. Would they suspect what she was really here for? She had to keep her emotions in check. Laurent had warned her that she would be tested, and she had already learned the importance of staying composed. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting between Laurent and a group of international investors, Sarah received a message from Lawrence's assistant. Asterisk, "Meet me at the office. We need to discuss something important." Asterisk, the message was brief, but the tone of urgency in it was unmistakable. She had no idea what it was about, but she knew it couldn't be good. As she arrived at Lawrence's office, she was met by the usual cool, controlled atmosphere. Laurent stood by the large windows, his back to her, looking out over the city. He turned when he heard her approach, his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but tinged with something darker. "There's something you need to understand. You've been observing, and you've done well. But now, I need you to do more than just observe." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was he asking? He had never asked her to do anything more than interpret. Now he was saying something else. "There's a situation," Laurent continued, "a delicate one. Someone within our group is betraying us, and I need you to help uncover who it is." The room suddenly felt smaller, the weight of his words sinking in. Betrayal? Sarah wasn't sure what to make of it. She had known that the world she had entered was filled with secrets, but she had never imagined she would be asked to help expose one. "But how can I help?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. Lawrence's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of the situation. "You've been watching closely. You've picked up on the subtle signals that others have missed. That's why I trust you with this." He stepped forward and handed her a small envelope. "Inside, you'll find everything you need to know. You won't have to act directly, but I need you to help me connect the dots." Sarah took the envelope, her fingers cold against the paper. The gravity of the task was heavier than anything she had done before. Laurent was giving her a responsibility that she wasn't sure she was ready for. She had only just started to feel like she understood this world, and now, she was being asked to navigate its shadows. As she left the office that evening, Her mind raced. Who was betraying Laurent? What had she missed? The answer wasn't clear, but Sarah knew that she had to dig deeper. The next few days were filled with subtle observation. Laurent had given her the names of several key individuals, all of whom had been involved in the meetings she had attended. She watched them carefully, noting their behavior, the small shifts in their tone, the slight changes in their body language. It was the small things that told the real story. During one meeting, Sarah noticed that one of the men, a prominent businessman from overseas, was unusually quiet. He had always been an outspoken advocate for the deal they were discussing, but this time, he was withdrawn, only nodding in agreement to everything Laurent said. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Sarah suspicious. She made a mental note of it. Later, she observed him again, this time in a hallway outside the conference room. He was speaking to another person in hushed tones, his voice low, but Sarah caught enough of the conversation to realize that it wasn't about the business at hand. She didn't know the full details, but she could tell that something was off. That night, Sarah reported everything she had observed to Laurent. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You've done well, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but filled with something else, approval. "But this is just the beginning. You've uncovered one thread, but now, we need to pull it all the way." Laurent's words hung in the air, and Sarah knew that whatever she had started, it was far from over. The shadows she had stepped into were growing deeper, and she was no longer just an observer. She was a part of the game, and the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The days following Sarah's discovery felt like a blur of unease and anticipation. She had uncovered a thread, a single clue, but it was only the beginning. Laurent's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, "You've uncovered one thread, but now, we need to pull it all the way." Asterisk, he had spoken of a game, but as Sarah dove deeper into the mystery, it became clear that it was more than just a game. It was a high-stakes operation, and she was no longer merely a bystander. The subtle betrayals, the hushed conversations, and the quiet manipulation were all around her, and she could no longer turn a blind eye. Every encounter felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, one that she had to solve before the pieces closed in on her. Over the next few days, Sarah observed the key figures Laurent had mentioned, paying attention to every nuance, every unspoken word. There were more quiet moments, more slips of the tongue, and the increasing realization that everyone around her was playing their own game. But there was one person who stood out to her, the businessman she had observed during that last meeting, the one who had been unusually quiet. His name was Richard Shaw, and he was as elusive as he was influential. At first, Sarah had thought little of him, dismissing his lack of engagement as mere disinterest. But now, after her discoveries, she couldn't ignore him. Shaw was always present in every meeting, yet never truly there. He spoke in carefully measured tones, his eyes darting to Laurent only when necessary. There was a cold calculation behind his every movement, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was the key to everything. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving the building, she spotted Shaw talking to a familiar face in the lobby. It was a man she had seen in several meetings, someone with connections to international trade, but she hadn't paid him much attention before. Shaw's words were muffled, but Sarah could hear enough to know that the conversation was more than just casual. Asterisk, "The deal has to go through, no matter the cost. You know what happens if it doesn't," Asterisk Shaw was saying, his voice low and threatening. The other man nodded, but it was the expression on Shaw's face that caught Sarah's attention. There was a hardness in his eyes, a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. He wasn't just talking business anymore. He was issuing orders. Sarah's instincts told her that something was wrong, but she couldn't place what it was. Shaw had always been quiet, but this was different. There was something sinister lurking beneath the surface. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with the images from the lobby, the way Shaw had spoken, the coldness in his eyes. She was certain that whatever was happening, he was at the center of it. But she needed more proof. She couldn't just act on a hunch. Laurent had entrusted her with this task, but she couldn't afford to fail him. The next morning, Sarah took it upon herself to follow Shaw. It wasn't the first time she had watched someone, but this felt different. Shaw wasn't just another businessman. He was the one pulling the strings, and she needed to understand what he was planning. She followed him through the city, staying at a safe distance, watching as he moved between meetings, always with the same purposeful stride. It wasn't until she followed him into a private building on the outskirts of town that she realized she had been right. Shaw wasn't just negotiating deals. He was orchestrating something much bigger. Inside the building, she watched as Shaw met with several people. It was a small, nondescript conference room, but the people gathered there were far from ordinary. They were powerful, influential, and their conversations were filled with words Sarah couldn't fully understand. She stood in the shadows, careful not to make a sound. She needed to hear everything. And then it happened. Shaw placed a folder on the table, and as he did, a man on the other side of the room spoke. Asterisk, we need to move forward with the plan. The stakes are too high. Asterisk, Shaw nodded. We can't afford any delays, he said. Asterisk, the money is already in place. We just need to execute. Asterisk, the words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The plan? What plan? And why was it so important that it couldn't be delayed? The more she listened, the more she realized that what they were discussing wasn't just business. It was something far more dangerous. They were talking about controlling the flow of information, manipulating markets, and bending the world to their will. Sarah's stomach churned as the pieces started to fall into place. This wasn't just about power and influence. It was about control. Control over everything. The conversation continued, but Sarah couldn't focus on the details anymore. She had heard enough. She had to get out of there before anyone noticed her. She slipped quietly out of the building, her heart pounding in her chest. As she walked back to the subway, the weight of what she had learned settled over her. Shaw was at the center of something dark, something that could change everything. She didn't know all the details yet, but she had a feeling that whatever it was far worse than anything she had imagined. She had to tell Laurent. But as she stepped onto the train, she realized something else. She had crossed a line. There was no going back now. She was in this, whether she liked it or not. And as she thought about Laurent's words, asterisk, you'll see things clearly. You'll understand what's beneath the surface. Asterisk, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake. Had she stepped into a world she wasn't prepared for? Or had she finally found her place? The train doors closed, and Sarah knew one thing for sure. Her life had just become far more complicated. The following days were filled with unease and a growing sense of urgency. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what she had overheard in the building with Shaw. The weight of the conversation, the plans, the secrecy, the scope of their manipulation, pressed heavily on her mind. It wasn't just about business deals anymore. It was about control. It was about power. The kind of power that reached beyond boardrooms and into the lives of ordinary people. She had to talk to Laurent. She couldn't keep this information to herself. The only problem was that Sarah wasn't sure what she could do with the knowledge she had. She wasn't equipped for a world like this. A world of high-stakes business, manipulation, and deception. Laurent had always made it clear that she wasn't meant to be directly involved, but now she was too deep into it to walk away. One evening, after a tense meeting at the office, Sarah found herself in a quiet corner of the restaurant, her thoughts swirling. The sound of clinking glasses and soft chatter filled the air, but she barely noticed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her trance. It was a message from Laurent's assistant. Asterisk, meet me at the usual place. There's something we need to discuss. Asterisk, Sarah didn't hesitate. She had to go. Laurent's office, where they had spoken before, was where everything had started, and now it seemed to be where it would all come to a head. When she arrived, Laurent was already waiting for her, his usual composed demeanor masking the tension that hung in the air. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he simply gestured for her to sit. Sarah took the seat across from him, the weight of the envelope from the previous day's assignment still heavy in her bag. She didn't know how to start. She couldn't just blurt out everything she had seen. So, instead, she waited, hoping Laurent would break the silence. He did, but not in the way she expected. Sarah, he said, his voice low, you've been observant. You've picked up on things that most people wouldn't even notice. That's why I brought you here. Sarah swallowed hard. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. There's something you need to understand, Laurent continued, his eyes never leaving hers. The world you've stepped into, it's not what you think. It's not about helping people. It's not about making the right choices or doing the right thing. It's about power, control, influence. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. I didn't think I was part of this, she said quietly, her voice betraying the fear she had been trying to suppress. Lawrence's expression softened, but there was no warmth in it. You've been part of it since the moment you decided to observe, he replied. You've seen things no one else has seen. You've picked up on the signals, the hidden messages. You've become more than just a witness. You're involved now, whether you like it or not. Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had never intended to get involved in something like this. She was just a waitress, someone who had been trying to make ends meet. But now, she was a part of something far bigger than she could have imagined. Laurent paused, his gaze piercing. The people you've been watching, they're not just business partners. They're players in a much larger game. A game that spans across borders, governments, and industries. And you've been in the middle of it all along. Sarah's mind was spinning. She had always thought that the world of high-powered business was a world apart, something that didn't touch her life. But now, she was realizing that she had been living in its shadow all along. The people she had thought were just strangers, just faceless businessmen, were part of a larger network of power. And she was now part of that network too. Laurent leaned forward, his tone growing more serious. I've trusted you with this information, Sarah, because I believe you're capable of handling it. But you need to understand something. This is not a game for the faint of heart. The decisions you make from here on out will have consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had no idea what kind of consequences he was talking about, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Laurent gave her a small, approving nod. I need you to help me uncover what they're planning. I need you to get closer to Shaw. He's the one with the answers. He's the one who holds the key. Sarah's heart raced. She had already seen the danger in Shaw's eyes. She had already felt the chill in the air whenever he was around. And now, Laurent wanted her to get closer to him. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that. I don't know if I can, she said, her voice shaking. Lawrence's eyes softened slightly. I understand your hesitation. But you have the ability to do this, Sarah. You're the one who can see through the lies, the manipulation. You're the one who can get the truth. Sarah sat in silence for a long moment, her mind racing. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she was ready to face Shaw or anyone else in this world she had stepped into. But she knew one thing. There was no turning back now. She was in this, whether she liked it or not. And as she left Lawrence's office that night, her thoughts were clouded with a sense of uncertainty. What had she just agreed to? And how far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Sarah had become a part of a game much larger than herself. Sarah stood outside the tall glass doors of Shaw's office building, feeling a deep sense of unease. The world she had stepped into felt increasingly alien to her, full of secrets, high stakes, and danger. Laurent had given her a task, to get closer to Shaw, the key figure in everything she had uncovered so far. But Sarah wasn't sure she could do it. Shaw was no ordinary businessman. She had seen the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he manipulated others without them even realizing it. She had overheard him issuing threats, and now Laurent wanted her to get closer to him. She couldn't ignore the rising tide of fear that swirled in her chest, but there was also a sense of responsibility. She couldn't turn back now. She had already crossed a line, and there was no going back. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped into the building. The marble floors and sleek, modern architecture of the lobby made it clear that Shaw was a man of wealth and influence. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, though there was an air of formality to the interaction that made her feel out of place. I'm here to see Mr. Shaw, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked, her tone a little too sharp. No, but it's urgent. I need to speak with him, Sarah replied, her heart pounding in her chest. The receptionist hesitated but then nodded, picking up the phone and dialing a number. Please wait here, she said before turning away. Sarah took a seat in the lobby, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the eyes of the other employees in the room on her, and for the first time, she wished she were invisible. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist returned. Mr. Shaw will see you now. Please follow me. Sarah stood and followed the receptionist to the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime, and Sarah stepped inside. The ride-up felt like it lasted forever. She could hear the soft hum of the elevator, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew she couldn't go into this unprepared. Shaw was dangerous, and she had no idea what he might do once she was face to face with him. The elevator doors opened, and the receptionist led Sarah down a long corridor. At the end of the hallway, a large, imposing door stood open, revealing Shaw's office. The room was dark, with only a few lamps casting a soft glow on the polished wood furniture. Shaw was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned when he heard her approach, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Shaw's expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity to his gaze that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth, almost cold. "I wasn't expecting you." Sarah stood her ground, refusing to let the nervous tremor in her legs show. "I have something to discuss with you," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the fear building in her chest. Shaw raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And what would that be?" he asked, stepping closer to her. Sarah hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She couldn't reveal everything. She couldn't let him know how much she already knew about his involvement in the deals Laurent had been investigating. But she had to play her part. "I know about the plan," she said quietly. Shaw's eyes narrowed slightly, but his face remained calm. "What plan?" he asked, his voice a little too casual. "The one you're trying to execute. The one that involves manipulating the markets, controlling the flow of information, and getting everything you want at any cost," Sarah said, her words coming faster now, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as him. Shaw's expression hardened, but he didn't speak immediately. He stepped back and gestured for her to sit. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, his voice colder now. "We have a lot to discuss." Sarah didn't move, but Shaw's gaze was so compelling that she finally took a seat across from him. She was sure he was reading her, trying to figure out what she knew and how much she understood. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, and it made her uneasy. "I don't know who you think you are, but I don't like being threatened," Shaw said, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "I'm not threatening you. I'm just telling you what I know," she replied, her voice surprisingly calm. Shaw leaned back in his chair, studying her with interest. "You've been talking to Laurent, haven't you?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. Sarah didn't answer. "He's using you," Shaw continued. "You think he's been helping you, but he's been pulling the strings all along. You're just another pawn in his game." His words hit Sarah like a slap, but she didn't let it show. She had already known that Laurent wasn't entirely honest with her, but hearing it from Shaw made her question everything. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but edged with tension. Shaw's eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating. "I don't want anything from you," he said, "but I think you could be useful. If you're smart, you'll stop playing Laurent's game and join me." Sarah didn't respond immediately. The offer was tempting. Shaw had power. He had influence. But she had already seen the darkness in his eyes, the way he controlled others. She wasn't sure she could trust him. "I'm not interested in playing your games," she said, standing up. Shaw's eyes flashed with anger, but he said nothing. Sarah knew she had made her decision. She couldn't get too close to Shaw, not without risking everything she had. As she left his office, she felt the weight of his gaze on her back. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that her life had just taken a dangerous turn. Shaw was a man who played for keeps, and now she was part of his game. The days following her encounter with Shaw were filled with a sense of dread that Sarah couldn't shake off. She had expected confrontation, but not the kind she had just walked away from. Shaw was a man who dealt in control, and he had made his offer clear. She could either play by his rules or risk becoming irrelevant. But there was something about his words that lingered in her mind, something that unsettled her even more than his cold demeanor. He had been right about one thing. Laurent wasn't entirely trustworthy. That much was clear. But as Sarah reflected on her role in all of this, she realized that perhaps she was beginning to play her own game, a game where the stakes were much higher than she had ever imagined. Sarah had always considered herself a small player, just a waitress trying to get by. But now, in the midst of this world of corporate espionage and manipulation, she was starting to realize how deep the web went. Laurent's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, the world you've stepped into isn't what you think. It's about power, control, and influence. Asterisk, she had been thrust into this world without fully understanding the rules, and now she was tangled in it. She had to find out who was behind the plan, who was manipulating the markets, controlling the flow of information, and pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't trust anyone completely, not even Laurent. The line between ally and enemy was blurring. One evening, Sarah met with Laurent at his office. The tension was palpable. She had more questions than answers, but she knew she couldn't keep going without confronting him. "I need to know the truth," she said, standing across from him, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Laurent, as usual, was calm, his expression unreadable. "You've been asking the right questions, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "But you need to understand, this isn't a game for amateurs." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "You know I've been working to uncover who's behind all of this, but everything feels like a lie. Shaw, the other players, even you, no one is telling the whole truth." Lawrence's gaze softened for a moment, and he stood up, walking toward the window, looking out at the city below. "Sarah, you're right. No one tells the whole truth. Not in this world. It's all about power, manipulation, and keeping the right secrets. What you need to understand is that sometimes those secrets are necessary. They keep things from falling apart." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it all. "So you're saying I should just accept it? That I'm part of a system I don't understand?" Laurent turned to face her, his eyes piercing. "You've been part of it from the beginning, Sarah. Whether you want to admit it or not. You've seen things, noticed things, and that makes you a part of it." She felt a chill run through her. The truth was starting to sink in. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a player in a game that had far-reaching consequences. "I don't want to be part of this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Lawrence's gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you can walk away, Sarah. But remember this. In this world, when you walk away, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't forget what you know." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Sarah knew he was right. There was no turning back. No matter what she did from this point forward, she would always be part of this world. Laurent was offering her a way out. But the reality was clear, there was no way out. She had already crossed a line, and the only way forward was through it. "What's the next step?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but determined. Laurent smiled, but there was no humor in it. "The next step is to gather more information. Shaw isn't the only one who's playing the game. There are others, and we need to find out who they are. We need to understand their motives before they make their next move." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the implications of what Laurent had just said. She was part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined, and now she had to play her part. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about survival. As Sarah left Lawrence's office that night, she felt the weight of the situation settle over her. There was no going back. She was in too deep, and the stakes were too high. Every decision she made from here on out would have consequences. She had entered a world of power and influence, and now she had to learn to navigate it. The shadows that had once seemed distant were now closing in, and Sarah knew that she was about to face challenges she couldn't predict. The game had only just begun. Sarah's life had shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first stepped into Lawrence's world. The days were no longer just about working her shift at La Belle Poche, serving drinks, and cleaning tables. Now, every action, every word, felt loaded with meaning. She was no longer an outsider. She was part of the game. The pieces had started to move faster. After her conversation with Laurent, she felt the weight of his trust on her shoulders. The truth she had uncovered was only the tip of the iceberg, and she knew she couldn't stop now. The more she learned, the more she realized how deep the conspiracy ran. Laurent had assigned her the task of gathering more information about Shaw, the elusive businessman she had come to see as both dangerous and manipulative. But as Sarah continued to follow Shaw's movements, she found herself tangled in the web of lies and manipulation that had been woven around her. It wasn't just Shaw she needed to keep an eye on. There were others involved in this intricate game of power, and Sarah was beginning to realize that the true players were hidden behind a veil of deceit. One evening, as she sat in a quiet cafe, watching Shaw enter a nearby building, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Laurent. Meet me at my office. We need to discuss your findings. Sarah had become used to the suddenness of Lawrence's requests. They were always urgent, always filled with an underlying tension. She had come to expect it. She made her way to Lawrence's office, her mind racing with what she had observed. She had learned some key details: Shaw's secret meetings with international investors, his ties to high-ranking officials, but there were still so many questions. When she arrived, Laurent was already waiting for her, his sharp gaze scanning the room. As she entered, "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I trust you've been keeping an eye on Shaw." "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. "He's meeting with people. But it's not just about business. There's something more." Lawrence's eyes narrowed slightly, and he motioned for her to sit. "Tell me everything." As Sarah recounted what she had observed, Shaw's meetings with foreign investors, the subtle threats he had made, the way he had manipulated people, Laurent listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a long pause. Laurent stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "You're right," he said quietly. "Shaw is a key player in this, but there's more to it. He's not working alone." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Laurent turned to face her. "There's a larger operation at play. Shaw is just a part of it. He's working with other factions, and they're trying to influence not just markets, but entire governments. This isn't just about profit. It's about control." Sarah felt a chill run through her. She had known that things were bigger than she had realized, but hearing it from Laurent made it all feel far more dangerous than she had imagined. "What do we do now?" she asked. Lawrence's gaze softened slightly, though there was still a cold determination in his eyes. "We move forward. But carefully. Shaw thinks he has the upper hand, but he doesn't know that we're watching him. The key is to stay one step ahead." Sarah nodded, trying to process the weight of what Laurent was saying. The game was much larger than she had thought. "I need you to stay close to Shaw," Laurent continued. "You've already seen how he operates. Now, I need you to get even closer. We need to find out who else he's working with, who's pulling the strings behind him." Sarah's stomach tightened. The thought of getting closer to Shaw, of risking everything she had just begun to understand, was terrifying. But she knew there was no other choice. She couldn't stop now. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. Laurent nodded, his expression serious. "Good. But remember, this isn't just about information. It's about power. The people we're dealing with are dangerous. If you're going to be part of this, you need to be prepared for anything." Sarah left Lawrence's office with a heavy heart, her mind filled with a mix of fear and determination. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. As she walked through the streets of Manhattan that night, the lights of the city seemed to mock her, as though the world was watching her every move. She was no longer just a part of the crowd. She was now a player in a game that she barely understood, but one that would determine everything. She had to get closer to Shaw. She had to learn more. And she had to do it without being discovered. But as she thought about everything Laurent had said, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper she went, the harder it would be to escape. She didn't know what the end game was, but one thing was clear, there was no going back. The following days were filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Sarah's role had changed from that of a passive observer to an active participant in a game she barely understood. The deeper she went, the more complicated it became, and now, she was tasked with getting closer to Shaw, a man whose motives were as obscure as the world he operated in. Laurent had been clear, this was the only way forward. Sarah couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to stay one step ahead, even if she didn't fully understand the stakes. As the days passed, Sarah found herself carefully monitoring Shaw's every move. His behavior had grown more erratic, and the usual mask of professionalism he wore was beginning to slip. At one point, she overheard him arguing with a business associate in a dimly lit hallway after a meeting, his voice sharp and filled with frustration. "This is slipping out of control," Shaw muttered under his breath. Asterisk, "We need to shut it down before anyone else notices." Asterisk, the word sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She wasn't sure what he meant by it, but it confirmed her suspicions that Shaw wasn't just playing a business game. He was part of something far more dangerous, something that could have far-reaching consequences. She had been following him for weeks now, but each new piece of information only raised more questions. What was he trying to protect? What was at stake? Shaw had always been a man who made calculated decisions, but now he seemed desperate, even unhinged at times. Sarah began to piece together a new theory. Shaw wasn't just trying to manipulate markets. He was trying to cover up something. But what? One evening, after an exhausting day of tailing Shaw, Sarah met Laurent at his office, desperate for answers. She couldn't go any further without understanding the full scope of what was happening. Laurent, as always, was waiting for her, his expression serious but unreadable. She didn't waste time. I'm getting closer to Shah, she said, her voice tight. Asterisk, but something's off. He's hiding something, Laurent. I don't know what it is, but it's big. And it's slipping out of control. Asterisk, Laurent's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit. I knew Shah would eventually show his true colors, Laurent said quietly, after a long pause. Asterisk, but we've been watching him for a reason. He's part of something bigger. Much bigger than you realize. Asterisk, Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Asterisk, what do you mean? Asterisk, she asked. Laurent stood up and moved to the window, his back to her. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. Asterisk, Shah isn't just an investor. He's connected to a group of people with far-reaching influence. They control industries, governments, and global financial networks. It's all about consolidating power. They pull strings from the shadows, manipulating everything in their favor. Asterisk, Sarah felt the weight of his words. Asterisk, what are they after? Asterisk, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Power, Laurent said simply. Asterisk, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. They've been laying the groundwork for years. Shah is their way in. He's the link, but there are others involved. And we need to find them before they complete their plan. Asterisk, Sarah felt a chill run through her. Laurent was right. She had uncovered the surface of something far darker. Shah wasn't the only player. He was a pawn in a much larger game. One where the consequences were far more than just financial. Asterisk, how do we stop them? Asterisk, Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Laurent's gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it. Asterisk, we don't stop them by fighting in the open. We have to gather information, real information. Shah is the key, but there are others who are pulling the strings from behind closed doors. I need you to continue getting closer to him. We need to find out everything he knows. Asterisk, Sarah felt the pressure of the task weigh heavily on her shoulders. She had already risked so much, and now Laurent was asking her to dig even deeper. But she knew she couldn't back down. She had already crossed too many lines. I'll do it, she said quietly. Laurent nodded, his expression hardening. Asterisk, good. But be careful. Shah won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to protect himself. You're not just dealing with a businessman anymore. You're dealing with a man who will do anything to keep his secrets buried. Asterisk, the thought of getting closer to Shah sent a ripple of fear through her. She had seen his cold, calculating side, but she hadn't seen what he was truly capable of. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. And yet, there was no turning back. The trap was set, and she was already a part of it. That night, as Sarah left Laurent's office, the weight of the decision she had just made sank in. Shah was no longer just a target. He was the key to everything. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the next few weeks would determine everything. She was walking a razor's edge, and the smallest misstep could send everything crashing down. The world she had entered was dangerous, full of shadowy figures and high-stakes manipulation, but Sarah was no longer an outsider. She was in it now, and the game was only just beginning. The final days leading up to Sarah's decision were a blur of tension and doubt. Each day felt heavier than the last as she continued to walk the fine line between survival and betrayal. The stakes had never been clearer. Laurent's trust in her was both a gift and a burden. She had become more than just an observer in this tangled web of power, manipulation, and corruption. She was now an active participant, a player in a dangerous game where every move could have catastrophic consequences. As the days passed, Sarah continued to observe Shah, to infiltrate his world, but with each passing day, she felt herself drawn further into the darkness. She had become good at reading the room, at noticing the subtle shifts in body language, the small unspoken cues that told the real story. She could see the way Shah maneuvered his alliances, the way he controlled every conversation, every room he entered. It was chilling, and it made her question just how much of her own life she had been controlled without even realizing it. She had uncovered the extent of Shah's influence. It wasn't just in the business world. He had connections everywhere, in government, finance, even the media. His reach stretched far beyond what Sarah could have ever imagined. He was a man who could bend the world to his will, and it was clear that he had no intention of stopping. Sarah felt a deep, gnawing fear. She had seen what Shah was capable of. He had made threats, manipulated people, and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. And now, she was in too deep to back out. But she had learned something important during her time with Laurent. Knowledge was power. Sarah knew that the only way to stop Shaw and the others like him was to expose them. She couldn't do it alone. Laurent had his own agenda, but Sarah was beginning to understand that his game wasn't the same as Shaw's. Laurent wanted control, but he wanted to shape the future, not destroy it. She had to make a choice. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about survival. And sometimes, survival meant making deals with people who played by their own rules. Sarah met Laurent one last time, in the place where it had all started, the office that had become her battleground. He was waiting for her, calm as ever, though Sarah could see the tension in his eyes. "You've done well," Laurent said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of something else in his tone, something that spoke of a new chapter. "But the time has come to make your move." Sarah looked at him, a mix of exhaustion and resolve in her eyes. "I've been in this too long now to back out," she said, her voice steady. Laurent nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've known that all along. You're in this for the long haul. But the real question is, what are you going to do with what you know?" Sarah took a deep breath. She had spent so long hiding in the shadows, watching, waiting. Now it was time to act. "I'm going to expose Shaw," she said, her words firm. "But not just him. The others who are pulling the strings, controlling everything from behind closed doors. They need to be stopped." Laurent studied her for a long moment, his eyes piercing. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his tone cautious. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes. I can't keep living in the shadows. I can't keep watching these people ruin lives, manipulate the world for their own gain." Laurent's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "Then it's time," he said, standing up. "Let's make sure the world sees them for who they really are." The plan was set into motion, and it was a carefully orchestrated one. Sarah had gathered enough evidence, enough intel on Shaw and his network, to bring them down. She had spent weeks, months, collecting the pieces, and now it was time to put it all together. It wasn't going to be easy. Shaw was a dangerous man, and exposing him meant risking everything. But Sarah had no choice. She couldn't stand by anymore, watching from the sidelines. She had become part of this world, and now it was time to change it. As the information went public, the world seemed to shift on its axis. Shaw's empire crumbled. His carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation was exposed for all to see. The connections he had built, the deals he had made, all of it was brought to light. The people who had once bowed to him now saw him for what he truly was, a man who had used power and influence to destroy everything in his path. It was over. But as Sarah watched everything unfold, she realized that the battle wasn't truly over. Shaw's fall was just the beginning. There were others out there, just as dangerous, just as manipulative. But now, Sarah understood the game. She had learned how to play it. And with the knowledge she had gained, she knew she could make a difference. Her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.